adorable. Happy birthday.
Thanks. You gave me heart failure on my birthday.
Yes. I was hoping so. I literally was like, I'm going to text him and just be like, Zoom, right? And see if I could generate. But then when you responded the way you did, I was like, I don't even think he was like phased at all. And then I was so bummed. But I'm glad to hear now.
Well, I was phased. My heart jumped. And I scrolled back up because I was like, if I screwed this up again, I'm not going to be able to live
Everything
with myself.
I wanted to accomplish was done today then.
Yeah, so you gave me the whole inside out to range of emotions, Kelly
Good.
Henderson.
Excellent.
So what do you want to talk about today?
I'm here because you told me to be. So what are we talking about?
Well, we can talk about a range of things. I really want listeners to get to know you a little bit. And so can I start by asking a couple questions about you?
You literally ask anything, David.
Ask anything?
Yeah.
All right. Everyone heard that. I can ask anything.
Anything.
So how did you get into the business and what were you doing before real estate?
Before real estate, I graduated from U of A. Bear down.
Bear down.
And
Are you from Arizona?
I am. I'm a native.
Wow.
I grew up like not that far from here, Bell in the 51. So this has literally been my hood my whole life. My kids go to the elementary school I went to now. So that's weird.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in some small town Hallmark movie, though it's Phoenix.
Is one of the hallways named after you?
It's weird being back there now. My son's last classroom was next door to the classroom that I had a crush on a guy who will be named nameless, since I don't know who's listening to this, because he ate his own boogers. That's not why I had a crush on him. That's why I'm not naming his name.
I'm glad you clarified.
But I definitely remember like things from elementary school that's been really weird. Anyway, so senior year, applied for grad school at Pepperdine, got in right like literally 3 weeks before moving out to California. No, I'm good at tricking people into liking me.
Okay.
Which is perfect real estate. But I kind of had a second thought. I was listening to like NPR or something by happenstance. Like my dad had it on the radio and they were talking about statistically people taking out student debt. So this was in 2011, would be paying it back when their kids went to school. And both Dustin and I, my husband, graduated, we both graduated debt-free. So it was the first time that I was like, I hadn't really thought of that. Did the math and was like, yup, that's what's in the cards for me too. And so it made me at least defer my enrollment. I was like, I want to be sure this is what I want to do before doing it. And I'm not the kind of person who thrives in a lack of direction. So like 60 days later, I was a mess, like a total basket case, not knowing like who am I and what's my purpose and like just very lost. And in that, I went down to U of A, met with a career counselor, not helpful. And then I went across the hall to meet with somebody who had been an advisor when I was running the Panhellenic Council down there. And she was talking to me about what I wanted my life to look like. And her perception of real estate was what like some agents' experiences are in real estate, not mine. And she thought like, that's perfect for you. And she brought it up and the second it came out of her mouth, it was like, why have I not thought of that? So the whole way back to Phoenix, I remember thinking like, that's crazy. This is my career. And I don't know if I would have said career at the time, but like, that's what I should do. And it's a little interesting. So a little bit of backstory that you know, but your listeners don't, is that I was homeless as a kid. And so for me, this like idea of the American dream has always been so much further away, but very cool. And in fact, my senior year in college, I worked as a leasing consultant at an apartment complex. And I remember thinking like, someday I'm going to have a rental. And so I'm going to need a copy of this lease they have here and I'm going to keep it. And then many years from now, when I have a rental, I can just like copy this.
Perfect.
And I think back to that, I'm like, well, that's funny because now I run from leases like the plague and have a property manager because I don't want to deal with any of my own properties.
I was going to say bulletproof strategy.
Yeah. But it's just funny to think of like that's where life went. Actually, a funny story along those lines. My mom was a real estate agent when I was born.
Really?
And a couple years ago, she found this box of old stuff. And one of them was a card from her brokerage for her baby shower that on the front says, to Arizona's newest real estate agent.
Oh.
Isn't that crazy?
That's sweet.
It's sweet. And then it's just like crazy to think like, I never saw that. I'd been in real estate for decades. I have all kinds of old open house flyers of hers that you would hand draw back then. Yeah,
hand draw?
Yeah, like, because they didn't have computer. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I just stumbled into real estate and it was like exactly what I was supposed to do.
Wow. It's interesting. I did my undergrad and then I started graduate school and I didn't have kind of my like epiphany, if you will, about how much debt I was taking on until like a year and a half into grad school. And I dropped out of grad school. I was like, I cannot come out of this with 6 figures of debt. I'm going to be
insane.
Absolutely crushed. And I was like, even if I like come out and my salary or business or whatever, I was planning on a job with a salary at that time. I was like, even if my salary is a third of what it could be with this graduate degree, it doesn't matter in the long run. Like with that amount of debt load, right? So okay, I gotta ask, because you're a leasing agent, right? And you grab this lease, and that's a big part of your story. Is like real estate for you has been this way for like discovering the American dream, and you've accumulated, and so you've done multiple things in real estate. Tell everyone kind of like what's your main thing in this business, and why are you still going strong in the business years later?
My main thing in the business is still selling. The way I look at it, I love real estate. And to me, real estate is the catalyst to the other things. It's not something I'm looking to get out of, but it's also, I've started to like remove that from being the central tenet of who I am. I think for a long time, it was like, what would I do without real estate? Now I'm like, I guess I'd probably just do the same thing and be a different product or whatever. But I love real estate. And so selling is still my main thing. For perspective, started as a solo agent, built a team that was functioning on its own while I was the David Morse of my office, but not nearly as good. And I hated it. I'm being serious. I hated it. And then I came back to production. I remember when I came back, people would say, so now that you're leaving the team leader role, what are you going to do? I said, I'm gonna go back into sales. I'm really excited to like get back with the business and stuff like that. And like, oh, so you're just gonna sell. And that was the phrase. And it's so funny because I can appreciate what they're saying. At the time, I had a resume that I think people thought was really cool. I was coaching for a massive coaching company at the time. I was running the office. I had this business that functioned without me. I was making no money, unhappy, and it was not enough to like bring me joy from the coaching. So I was just like miserable. But it was a cool resume to look at. And so for me coming back into production was 2 things. I said, I only want to do what I want to do. So I was getting rid of a lot of stuff that I had built my business on that was profitable and brought me business, but I hated. And then, so cold calling mostly. And then, I wanted to make a lot of money doing it. And I knew that if I just did it myself with the right leverage, I could make a buttload of money. And I was right. So I've increased profit and decreased headache and have been really happy in that space for the last 5 years. So that's what I do now is I sell.
Neat. Can I ask you a question on that? Like,
yeah.
I'm curious how long it takes different people to come to this realization, this self-awareness really. Like, how long do you think it took you to, 1, become aware that you were miserable, and then 2, to do something about it?
Oh, it might even make me cry saying this. So I remember when we finally got to the position where I hit like rock bottom, one night I turned to my husband and I said, Dustin, I think I want to quit being the team leader, which I don't usually use that word. Like I might choose to end something, but quitting is a different word. But I very deliberately chose quit. And he goes, well, that makes sense. And I was like, that's a weird way to say anything about that. And I said, why does that make sense? And he goes, well, you just seem miserable all the time. And my response was, why didn't you tell me? Like, if you thought this so clearly, why have you never said anything? And he's like, I don't know. I thought you knew. And it was this whole thing that like, I think because of who I was in business with, I was willing to overlook the unhappiness for so long because there was a good exchange of like, not collateral because it sounds so like transactional, but like I really enjoyed who I was doing everything with and what I was learning and how I was growing. And so it made it easy to kind of overlook some other stuff. And when that piece of it was gone, I just looked up and was like, I hate this. I just hate it. So I think that what's harder in that whole journey is just selling real estate Every time I go to an event, every time I meet with somebody who I look up to and I respect their business, I have to recalibrate my compass because it starts to pull. It starts to be like, why don't I have that? Like, why don't I have a call center? Why don't I have a buyer's agent? Why, like, do I really like going on appointments? Yeah, I do. But like, what if I didn't? And all the big agents don't. And like, I think of these things and I always have to recalibrate because as a coach, I've also seen all of their profit and loss statements. I've also seen what their calendars look like. And those things have pros and cons, right? There's no right way in the business, but I know for what my life looks like and what I want it to look like, it's just not a fit. Yeah. So I still struggle with it. But I think ultimately, I don't know if it was an age thing or if it was just like being run down for so long or how long I've been in the business. Like, I don't know which piece it was, but it made it a lot easier to be like, this just isn't the right fit. And at the time I was coaching with Sajag Patel, who's now the COO of KW. And so it's funny because when people like hear him on stage, I'm like, you used to listen to me cry on the phone a lot. He's really the one who helped put a lot of like real questions in the way. And I remember when I quit MAPS and I left my coaching job there, I said, this is your fault. Because you have created a space where my brain can be just very happy making the choices that I want to make instead of whatever I think fits the mold or what I'm supposed to do or what other people expect of me to do. And I think on the plus side, just being true to who I am, I think has given a lot of permission to do the same for others.
That's amazing.
And that makes me really happy. Like when I talk to people or I'm teaching at an event or something like that and people come up to me after and they're like, I really resonated with you on the panel versus the others because of fill in the blank. And that makes me really happy.
Well, and to have a 180 from being miserable, but putting on the face of being, happy, joyful, whatever word you want to use, to now truly being able to experience that. I mean, it's got to be like night and day.
It is.
I want to, and Sajak is amazing. And I think what he put on display there too, one of the things I was going to say is I teach this model around, they're all alliterated with R's because my brain needs alliteration. And so like you reach someone that you're coaching, you ready them for the mission that they want to accomplish. And then sometimes you just have to release them. And the mark, I believe, of a good coach or a good leader, a good boss is if what's best for that person is to release them, like you do that. And he helped you do that and release what was holding you back. I got to ask you, like, was there a method or is there a method to your recalibration? Like when you find yourself getting caught in that like gravitational pull that you talked about with either comparing or wanting to add more, is there a method of recalibration? What does that look like?
Yeah,
for
it's
you?
literally like a series of questions. So I was meeting with this the best examples. I was meeting with this amazing agent who I really look up to, and she was talking to me about some changes they were making in their business, and I was just blown away, like at the path, the like speed, the intention, energy, all of it. I was like, damn, that's a lot of energy. Like, that's cool. Why am I not doing that? So that's kind of the thing. And so I could feel my compass like, and through the conversation, I started to like hear the little voices in my head that I've been having to like remind myself this whole time. One of them is around profitability. Very proud about how much money I actually make. And at some point in time, we get to a point in the conversation that I said, what does that do to your profit margin? And the number she told me, I was like, oh my wow, I'm not interested in that. And for her, it made sense. She is on this growth trajectory that has this end game, and that requires a lot of investing between here and there, which I love. Good for her. Like, it's perfect for her, but it's not for me. All of my goals right now are centered around my net worth goal of 10 million in 10 years and the life I live while getting there. They have to coexist. It's not one for the other. They're supposed to like really be in a symbiotic relationship. And that path she was on would take me off course. So it makes it very easy to look at that and be like, that's not for me. And I know that as time goes on, as it always does, right? Baby Kelly agent to now is on a different path. So I know it'll be different in the future. And that's always what I say is like, for me, it took a long time to switch from like growth mindset being agent count, team size, unit size, whatever, to my net worth growing. And every time I talked to, especially a lot of people I looked up to, if they didn't slow down enough to hear what I was doing, they always just saw it as me settling in the business, which hurt, right? Like the people I love were like, I expect more of you, basically. And then I'd have to like remind myself that growth isn't just units and agents. And that is where I ultimately come back to is like, am I growing? Yes, I'm making more money. My net worth is growing, which means I can say yes to more things and no to more things I don't want to say yes to. And it also means like, am I showing up with my kids and my husband the way I want to? And if those worlds are going the right way, then I don't need whatever the opportunity is. And if the opportunity will present me with more of that, I'm all in. So it makes it easier to say yes or no.
You really, you hit on something quickly that's extremely important, I think. And it's this idea that true freedom is actually not in being able to say yes to stuff. It's being able to say no, right? And that is an asset that really doesn't have like a temporal measurement, like the ability to say no. Curious, why 10 million in 10 years?
Well, then that was the number. It is probably, I mean, I'm at year 6 right now, and I'm already like, I need to start like figuring out what that new number is. So at the time, it was Sajak who asked me this question. He said, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? And at the time, that was 2017. And so 10 years prior to that, I was graduating high school. And I think like if you would have asked Kelly in 2007 where she sees herself 10 years from now, this is not what she would have said. And so then I'm like, how are you even supposed to begin that question? Like, what does that even mean? And his response was like, what would your financial world need to look like to support how it feels to be where you're at? And so it took away like titles and jobs and careers and stuff like that and made it more about like, what does your life look like? And and so I was able to identify that. And then it was what financial goal is needed for that. So the time my net worth was probably like 150. And it was really just the equity of the first home that we had purchased with the next home kind of stacked underneath it. And so I thought like $1 million would be really cool. Like I said, I was homeless 10 years prior to that, or just a few more than that. And so like, that seems kind of crazy to be a millionaire, you know, within 20 years of not having a house. And then I was like, I'm going to get on the phone with him and he's going to do that KW thing where you're like, cross it out and double it, or like, it's not big enough. And so I thought about it and I was like, if I said 10 million, I think that'll shut him up. Like if we get on the phone, I don't think he'll be able to push back. So I get on the phone and I tell him that. And I was like, but here's the problem. Like, I don't know how to do that. I don't even know what the first step is towards that. So I built this calculator. This was before like KW Wealth and all this stuff. And I've always been friends with like Brett and Brian and a bunch of big thinkers in the wealth space who had given me a net worth tracker. So I kind of like at least had conceptually. So in that, I built a tab that was like a mathematical formula of what does your 9, 8, 7, and then what does your 1 look like. And I remember looking at that and being like, I can do that in my sleep. Because we can, in the beginning, you can just make whatever that number is if you work hard enough. It's when you get to like going from 5 million to 8 million in 1 year that you're like, well, I don't know if I can earn my way from 5 million to 8 million, that your brain starts to think. But I remember that's kind of what the journey was. So I came up with 10 million because I knew it would shut Sajak up. But then the more I thought about it, especially using like the 4% rule and stuff like that, I started to think like that amount of money would allow me to retire. Like that's the life that I would be okay with. Essentially, that would put me in total financial freedom. Now, will I eventually want bigger numbers and to do bigger things? Absolutely, because I think like that's how my mind is geared. But I do know that by hitting that goal, I can not sell ever again. My kids can do whatever they want. I'll leave behind generational wealth. Like I already know that I'm good, and that'll be before I turn 40. So that sounded pretty badass to me.
That's pretty badass.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is this topic that I think it could be scary going into this, but it's personal to me, and I want to go here and ask you your perspective on this. Especially, I think you're wired like me. We're wired similarly. Like we want to achieve, we want to like do big things, and we want to grow, right? All these things. And we're in an environment, fortunately, on the one hand, that is what is taught. It's never settle, grow, double it, all of these things. But there's something really sinister about then feeling as though you have to look the part versus be the part. And I'm just curious now, it sounds like you've worked through a lot of that and you have like just a lot of peace about how you look at growth. Like, how do you define growth?
I think at its core, it's like, am I better than I was yesterday? So, like, does my business feel better than it did yet? I don't necessarily care about unit growth, but like, if we use real estate as an example, like, is my average price point going up? Is my average commission going up? Are my headaches going down? Is the like ease of the process going down? Do my referrals go up? Like, is life getting better, easier in general? I think is one way that I kind of quantify that in my business, since I haven't changed most of my goals around real estate in a couple years. They go up on an annual goal basis, but frankly, that mostly means my units are going down because I don't care about, like, as long as I make more money, I don't really care.
Yeah.
So I think that helps on that side. I'm even more diligent on my like personal side of things. So am I continuing to meet my weekly date night goals with my husband? Am I like participating in my kids' lives the way I want to? I don't miss anything. I don't miss practices. I don't miss I mean, every now and then because I'm on a girls trip or a work trip or whatever, sure. But like within reason, I'm at everything. I'm the room mom, I volunteer. So like when I actually think about my work life related to my personal life, it's in good relation with each other. And so for me, that is growth, right? Getting to be present in their lives, meaning I am constantly growing with them. And that's the part that like real estate will always be here waiting for me. If 10 years from now, I want to create a business that does 1,000 units a year, like my kids will be graduating high school and I can do that. But I can't reverse it. And so for me, a lot of my thoughts are more centered around that and how this life can support that life and work well together.
I think there's something that it's really resonating with me, Kelly, that this like barometer of how does my business feel? Like, and I don't know, there might be some like Heidi's like listening to this that are like, oh, feeling blah, blah, blah. But there is something like that is such an interesting barometer that like, because here, I'm a believer that like culture is when you walk into a room, what do you feel? And I think if we're talking about like a lifestyle business or the lifestyle that we're seeking to create for those who depend on us, you really have to step back sometimes and say, how does this feel both to me and to the people who mean the most to me? Like, how does what I'm doing in my business and in my growth journey feeling to my spouse, my partner, my kids, those other people? I don't know. I just think there's a lot of wisdom in kind of how you're describing that. Well,
I appreciate that. And first off, I am a high D, so I can appreciate with what they might be thinking. And second, you could do the exact same thing from that perspective. So for me, like a high D is just like, well, what's my bottom line here, right? So my bottom line is I make more money and I spend less time working.
Boom.
That sounds good.
That's a keep it simple, stupid method. Like, yeah.
And so like, I guess if you're asking yourself those questions, that's, and you want to phrase it differently and maybe get away from the feeling side of things for your personality type, then that's what I would say is like, you good with the business that you built? Cool. And I can appreciate what you're saying about the environment we're in for growth. I do think that especially in the Keller Williams world, I don't know if I can speak as much to the real estate world as a whole. I feel like there has been a really big shift around like what's productive, what's smart, what's the right choice. Everything from, Gary talking about how happy are you?
Yeah, you remember that moment? Like, I remember the exact moment.
And I remember the questions he was talking about. I was like, okay, I can't really get into those, but I love the like thought process behind it about like, it's not just production. So I think that's one way. I think our focus on profitability is another way of doing it. I have lived many lives in real estate, and the ones where it looked cool and wasn't cool were not fun. Like, I feel bad for the people who are listening to this being like, no, I like how it is. And you're like talking yourself into it. And there's also moments, right, of growth where that that's just part of the deal. But I think that, when you can just figure out what it is you want and then just try your hardest to jam your head into the sand and then just be happy with that, not in an avoidance way, but in knowing that that's what's good for you. Because you can always pivot at any time. There's a book I'm obsessed with that everyone has to read. And of course, now, Think Again. Gosh, I was going to be like, if I can't think of it, it's going to be embarrassing. It's called Think Again by Adam Grant, who's amazing in general. But yeah, this book, have you read Think Again?
No, I just read all his tweets.
I love him. I'm not on the Twitter, but on Instagram, he has a great account. And in it, he talks about so often we just make a choice and stick with it. And I think real estate's a petri dish of that, where you're like, I'm going to build a team. And then you're like, cool, this is the path I'm on. And he talks about like, he'll use politics as an example or religion or whatever, and says like, we often just pick a thought process and then it's just easier not to question it, to go with it, to be happy with it, even if you're not happy with it, but just like status quo. And that's something that I'm very comfortable with, is knowing that there's going to be a point in time where my life will look different, but I'm also okay with it not changing right now.
Well, I think part of it is like this we're so concerned, and I put myself in this too, like the appearance of failure is like crippling sometimes. And I think sometimes when you go back to just production, right? Like, I mean, I've got to imagine there was an element where you had to do battle with this like idea that, wow, like people around me kind of think I like failed or I'm settling. And like, you've got to do war with that, because the reality is, the only inevitable in life, as Gary says, is change. And we should also apply that to what our business looks like, right? And you don't have to stay on that path. In fact, I was listening, and this is a little bit different, but from a financial perspective, whether you like all this guy's stuff or not, Dave Ramsey was being interviewed by Alex Hormozy several months ago. And one of the things that Dave said that stood out to me was how Ramsey Solutions, which is like it's like a $500 million company now. Like, it's
insane. It's insane what they've built.
It's insane. And he was talking about market velocity. And he said, you've got to remember that in the business world, what used to take 5 to 10 months to gather data and response now takes 5 to 10 weeks. He said, so we will spin off education and products and all of this stuff. And if we're not having the response we want in 5 to 10 weeks, boom, we pivot and we go to the next thing. And I bring that up because I think there are times where I've even coached people like, oh, if you're going to go to this strategy or this is the vision for your business, like you've got to stick to it and you got to keep doing it. Well, I think market velocity actually applies to our business life sometimes as well, where if you don't have any accountability or anyone consulting you, sometimes we actually can stick with something a little too long. And I don't know if other people believe that, but that's my belief, that sometimes you're banging your head against the wrong 100%. Wall.
It's kind of what he talks about. And think again, he talks about like people think of quitting as such a negative thing, but realistically, it should be viewed as your ability to switch gears to a better place, right? And I'm not talking about like giving up on dreams and stuff like that, because if it's still what you want, you just need to pivot and do something different. But he talks a lot about like, it's a fool's errand to just keep like running straight when you should be turning. And so, if you're running in the wrong direction, like you have to slow down enough to like look around and be like, I should be running this way. What am I doing? And I really enjoy that.
What's something that you're most proud of in your business?
In my business, I'm proud of the size of the business I have related to the free time I have, correlated to leverage. I think I've done an amazing job leveraging the correct pieces to have the highest profit margin while providing great lives for the people who work for me. So not just being like cheap, but providing the right life for them while also getting rid of the stuff on my plate that slows me down. And I think that's really got kind of the happy medium of everything I've been looking for. So I think identifying the right leverage and then finding the right people for it. And
I see that in your business. It's like a little bit of an inside peek. And thank you for being transparent. Like, can you flip it around? Like for listeners, like what would you consider a failure or something that you're not proud of?
1,000 things, I'm sure. Let me think if I can think of like the biggest failure or thing I'm not proud of. It's tough because like my personal perspective on failures and like mistakes and regrets and things like that is that if you wouldn't have done them, you wouldn't know what you know.
Right.
So like it's hard to look at something and be like, I wish I wouldn't have done that, because then I think of like all the things that would have happened as a result. But I think if I would have simplified my life a lot sooner and pointed in the right direction a lot sooner, then I would have been worth more money right now and been happier sooner. So like if I would have changed that, but then I wouldn't have understood the power of like what it means to say no and why I should be saying that. And I wouldn't have, it's not the same answer. But so I do think like if someone's listening and they're learning from my failure, then they should ask themselves like, why am I saying yes to this stuff? I remember when I left the team leader role, the biggest fear I had is that I would get forgotten about in real estate. that like by saying no to something and someone's could have created like a bad image around me or a lack of opportunity for the future. And I feel like if I tried right now and like went and looked for something, I could find something awesome right now. And I mean, it's 5 years later, so it took time for me to truly believe that. And frankly, it had to have taken a lot of evidence, right? Phone calls that I've received or conversations I've had or classes I've taught or whatever for me to be like, I still totally could do whatever, not whatever I want, but like I couldn't still control my own destiny and forcing myself to stay in a relationship because it feels like the right thing, or not the right thing, but the thing I should do is not the right answer. So I think people shouldn't fear narrowing and being happy, because when you do that, it allows you to just double down and be really good at what you're good at. And that's really going to be like, I mean, frankly, for better or for worse, KW's currency is productivity.
Yeah.
Right? The more productive you are at something, and real estate in general. And so like, I think back to like, okay, so if I would have just simplified things and been as profitable 10 years ago as I am now, like people be pretty impressed by that. But I just got really thin. And so, you know, just sticking to what your true north is.
I was talking with a group of friends. We share some of them, and you know, there was this. It was a part of a quote that I read at some point, and I was just like stewing on it. I'm sure I was like in the sauna or something, TMI. But the quote went something like, everyone dies two deaths. The first when they put you in the ground, and the second when they forget your name. Ugh. And being really transparent. When you just talk about like this fear around like people forgetting you, that's real for me. And as I was thinking about this, I added to the chat with these buddies of mine, I put that quote and I finished it. The best shot that we have, in my opinion, at someone remembering our name is the people that share a dinner table with us every night. Mm. And like for me, you know, because it sounds like we've had lots of overlap in roles and maybe achievement and things of that nature. You know, you're probably just a little bit more wise and further along than me. You were going to
say older.
No, I think you're younger than me. Just more wise. But I've had to really wrestle with, you know, this idea of legacy and people remembering my name, and my best shot being those people that are closest to me. And so I'm sharing this because I not only resonate, but for listeners out there, I think you got to really ask yourself, who is it that will remember your name? Because that's truly where your legacy lies. And in listening to Kelly, I hope you're taking inventory and doing an audit of sorts on your own life and business, because true happiness, I think, lies in being able to ask these hard questions, get to the bottom of them, and then order your business in that way. And so you've done a phenomenal job. I know you'd say you're still on the journey of growth and what this all looks like. Before I let you go, I want to ask you 3 questions. 3 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
All right. What's
terrified.
the most? You should be. What's the most impactful book on your business and why?
Well, in the immediate time, it's Think Again. I'm very nerdy passionate about that. I would say if we have younger listeners right now, The Defining Decade was the book of my 20s that I think, I mean, I buy it for anyone who's close to me in my world who's in their 20s. Like, it is the book that you have to read.
You haven't bought it for
20s.
me.
Well, you said you're older than me.
Yeah, I'm not in my 20s.
But I like Think Again a lot because I think, MREA would be my answer for real estate. And then...
that's boring, though.
I know.
I like
so
Think
that's
Again.
like if we're talking about less tactical and more like bigger picture thinking, probably MREA. The Compound Effect is another one that I think has just such a lasting impact, but that's just a quick read. So Think Again is probably up there with one of them.
And the other one was Defining Decade, you said?
Yeah, The Defining Decade, it's all about why your 20s are so impactful. And I think especially for our generation, I'm going to loop myself in with you on that. I think for our generation, a lot of people get into this mindset of my 20s is when I can relax for a second before real life starts. And it talks about the stats about how absolutely not true that is, and how the 20s are really like your foundation, and how big your house is depends on what you do in your 20s. And it comes at 3 different facets. It talks about like work and what you do with that, relationships, and the third one might have been finances or whatever. But I probably read that when I was like 20, 21, 22, 23, like multiple times a year. Loved that book.
Very cool. I'll have to check that out, even though I'm too old for it.
Well, I still think it's also impactful, like for people who work with people in their 20s, because it also talks about the brain development and stuff and like what's actually happened. It's just fascinating. But think again for all of my older friends.
Yeah. All right. Question number 2. And I'm going to spin the question a little bit as we come back this season on Real Talk. I always ask every listener this, but here's the spin on it. I want to ask you, who's been one of the biggest influences in your life, but that you want to thank publicly right now?
I would thank my mom. I think our life has been very complicated. Not her and my relationship, we're literal best friends. But our life has been very complicated. And I think when people like go to thank people, I think of people who've made like, I don't know, maybe like big businesses or lots of money or whatever the case is. And for many years of my mom's life, she was in a position of nothing. And it's what she did with that that's just insane to me. Like I think about hard times now, and then I think about what she went through, like raising my brother and I alone on $0 and no house and stuff. And I just think like, that's amazing. And then I look at what her life looks like now, where she's been able to build this, retirement nest egg and all of this stuff, and how much she loves her life and her world and stuff. And I'm like, that's just some awesome stuff. And I think she's just instilled a lot of grit in me. And I think that's kind of one of my superpowers, grit. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that would come from my mom. Love it.
Last question.
Yeah. I've done so far so good with the 2. I'm terrified of the 3rd. Let's see if I can.
You're doing great, and you're dropping lots of wisdom. And really, the last question is, you've got a lot of listeners out there, various points in their business, various points in their wealth journey. Given the current like industry environment, market environment, blah blah, all that stuff. Like, what's one piece of advice you're giving to real estate professionals right now?
It's not a year; it's a career. Like literally just put your head in the sand and keep doing what you're supposed to do. It doesn't matter what's going on with commissions. It doesn't matter if the market's slowing down. It doesn't matter if interest rates are up. It doesn't matter if it's harder to buy investment properties, or like literally none of it matters, because it comes and goes. And so like the hard things that we're dealing with right now will be easy in the future, and there will be new hard things that we're not even ready for. So like it does not matter. So just do the things that work and keep doing them, and just don't, like, if you love real estate and you're struggling with it, just don't quit. I remember when I started in real estate, I remember thinking like if 80% of agents leave in 2 years or whatever the stat is, there has to be something to 2 years. Like what's that number about that like everyone else doesn't quit once they get past it? And I remember at month 20, 21, something like that, I got my first past client who called that needed me to sell their house. And they were like, I just didn't know if you would be interested in helping us sell it. Like, and the whole time my head's like, let me think about it. Yes. And I remember being like, this is it. This is why, because everybody quit before now, and they didn't get to experience the moment where you're like, I built trust and credibility, and I followed up with them, and I had great relationship, and now they called me instead of me calling them. And I think that applies to literally everything. And that's kind of what they talk about in the compound effect, right? If you have enough time, you can do whatever. And so it's literally just whatever. Who cares what's going on right now? Just put your head in the sand and keep doing what you're doing, and you'll come out on the other side.
It's such good advice. I talk about running all the time because I was a runner in high school. Clearly not now. I always hated it, but a curse from the universe is I was good at it. And the runner's high really is the longer you run, the further you downshift. And if anyone has ever been out there and you're revving the engine all the way up on the RPMs, and then you downshift, it's like, oh wow. And that's like that 2 year in real estate or any business really. Repeat clients, referrals, renewals, whatever the business is that you're in. And so I think it's great advice to just put your head in the sand, get distraction free, and just push through. So, hey, you've provided a ton of value. You still teach on occasion. You still are on podcasts and stuff like that. But if people want to connect with you, where's the best place to connect with you, Kelly?
Yeah, Instagram is frankly the easiest, at Kelly Henderson Realtor, but anyone can always email me. It's just kellyhenderson@kw.com. And I'm happy to connect. I mean, I still love coaching. I do some wealth coaching, and I love being able to teach and give back. But honestly, I just help whoever asks for it. And so if somebody needs help with something and just has a one-off question or something like that, I'm happy to help.
Love it. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on Real Talk. This has been a lot of fun. I love being in business with you.
Me too.
And when did you say you graduated?
11.
Oh, I am younger than you. That's it, guys.
I knew it.
Have a great day.
What'd you
And go play all in, y'all.